Green turns green.
Batteries in for you.
Yeah.
I drove back to Des Moines, I stopped in Des Moines.
Okay, at 6 o'clock.
I do too.
So
Okay.
would we like
Do
to
you want to
do
do
the?
the pledge of allegiance?
Yeah, why don't we call the meeting, the November 18th Planning Commission meeting to order, and let's all rise and say the pledge. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Great, the Planning Commission members remain standing, we have to take an oath.
So in front of you, you will find oath of office. If we can all read that first statement where it says, "I" and then your name. Okay. So,
I, Bill Marshall, do
solemnly
solemnly swear
swear
that I will
support
support
the Constitution of the United States and of the state of Minnesota, and faithfully, for and on behalf of the citizens of the city of Credit River, discharge the duties of the office of planning commission member for the city of Credit River in the county of Scott in the state of Minnesota, to the best of my judgment and ability, so help me God.
and if I can have you sign that. And then-
Okay, the first item on the agenda tonight is to approve the agenda. Does anyone have any changes or additions they want to make to the agenda tonight?
Mr. Chair, I make a motion to approve the agenda as written.
Great, I have a motion by Mark. Can I get a second motion?
Second.
Abe seconds. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried. The next thing we have to do is select a chair and a vice chair. Prior to meeting, we all talked briefly, and I volunteered to be the chairperson for the planning commission. And is there anyone else want to be the chair?
I move that the planning commission select Bill Markert as chair.
Great, thank you. Do I have a
I'll
second?
second that.
Steve will second. Can I get all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carried. Bill
Mr.
Markert,
Chair, I'll make a motion to approve Amy Olson as co-chair.
I have a
Vice
motion.
Chair.
I have a motion by Mark for Amy Olson to be vice chair. Can I get
Second
a second? Great. Abe second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carried. Congratulations, Amy. The next thing on the agenda is a consent agenda. Those items on the planning agenda which are considered routine or non-controversial are included as part of the consent agenda. Unless a planning commission member specifically requests that an item on the consent agenda be removed and considered separately, items on the consent agenda are considered under one motion, second, and vote. Any item removed from the consent agenda shall be at the end of the general business. We have nothing on the consent agenda, so we can move to the next item on the agenda, and that is the public hearings. We have two tonight. The first one we're going to open up, the public hearing is for the Century Pond Second Edition. There's variances and a preliminary plat that we're going to discuss and consider tonight. So why don't we start by having Cindy Nash, our city planner, present the project that we're going to talk about.
Thank you. On your agenda, for the first item is Century Pond Second Edition for a preliminary plat and 7 variances. The variances are generally all interrelated to the same item. So as part of the presentation, I'm just going to explain the plat generally and what they're proposing to do. And then we can continue discussion from there about what specifically the variances are. And so what they're proposing to do is come off of the existing Kane Avenue. And hopefully you can see barely my mouse on the screen up there. And they would extend and put in a cul-de-sac in this location that's highlighted in yellow with the diagonal slash lines through it. And they would also plat Kane Avenue from the end of the constructed part, or the to be constructed part of the cul-de-sac down through this location. So it would be 66 feet wide most of the way until you get to the end of lot 1, where it's adjacent to lot 1 there. It would be 33 feet wide. There would be 3 lots, lot 1, which would be a new lot, lot 2, which would be a new lot, and lot 3, which would be the existing farm homestead on the site. The variances,
Is lot 3 considered a new site when it's subdivided that way? Or is it considered an existing lot?
it's new.
It's new.
Now, in this case, lot 3 though is still large enough in size that it could potentially still qualify for ag taxes and for agricultural use for buildings and some things like that based on the size of what it is, as long as it's still being used for ag purposes and meets all of those qualifications under state law. So what the plans are showing you, in sort of a lighter gray color, is you can see how in the future that lot 3 could be subdivided again. A cul-de-sac and road extended further, and obviously some items potentially being torn down in the area of the existing homestead, and they would have 3 additional lots at that point in time potentially. The variances that are being considered, the first one is related to that all lots shall be provided access via local streets. So right now what's being proposed is, because the cul-de-sac would terminate on the western side of lots 1 and 2, lot 3 would not actually have access to a local street. It would only have access to, zoom out a little bit here, to the 2 county roads that are here. They are proposing to remove the driveways onto County Road 8 and only have the 1 driveway on the County Road 27. The second, so there's various places in the ordinance that require that that we pull access off of those arterial and major collector types of roads and put them onto local streets as we're doing these sorts of replatting efforts. The next variance is that lot 3 is related to lot 3 not having 100 feet of frontage on a road improved to city standards. To just give an example, obviously lot 1 has plenty of frontage on, even with just the cul-de-sac part, lot 1 would have plenty of frontage on a road improved to city standards along with lot 2. But lot 3 is not, it's fronting on some proposed to be dedicated right away, but it is not improved to city standards. So that's the purpose of variance number 2, is to request that. Variance number 3 is that stub streets shall be installed to permit future street extensions. And what would be more typical is that this, you think of this in terms of that this property could be developed further later in the future. This would still be extended to here, and we'd have a temporary cul-de-sac at the end of this. And then in the future, the rest of the extension would occur ending in that permanent cul-de-sac. Variance 4 is related to pavement width, needs to be as identified in the city engineering standards. And in this case, because they're proposing not to pave Kane Avenue, so to have a pavement width at 0, it's not meeting that requirement.
The cul-de-sac that's being proposed, is that paved?
That would be paved.
Okay, but not the Kane Avenue to the right or to the east?
Correct. The only part they're proposing to pave is the part that I highlighted and and put the diagonal lines through.
Can I ask one more question?
Yep.
If the cul-de-sac was at the end of Kane Avenue in that picture, would that be considered, could that be gravel? As long as Kane Avenue is paved? And the reason I ask is that I have one of those in my subdivision where it looks like there's a turnaround on Crestview Lane where it's gravel. The road goes up to that turnaround. Is that considered code?
So that, I'm familiar with the gravel cul-de-sac in Crestview. That was a situation that was approved prior to the city obtaining its own planning and zoning. Our current ordinances require a paved cul-de-sac.
Okay.
Also, that situation in Crestview is a little bit unique in that there was originally a county road plan in that location. And at the time, it was just, the road was constructed to that point to where that future county road would be constructed. That's still in the county's comprehensive plan, and so that still may happen someday.
Okay. All right, thank you, sorry.
So variance number 5 is again related. It's that street connectivity needs to be provided to this lot 3. And since Kane would not be improved, we're missing that connectivity. Variance number 6, again related, that lot 3 doesn't have direct access to that local street. And the last variance is variance 7. They're asking for the driveway for lot 3 to be onto a county road instead of a city road. There had been a lot of discussions about this back in June at a concept plan level before the city council. And the idea was at that point in time that, I'm going to switch to this other graphic, that if a preliminary plat that would be more like this one was submitted, all of those other variances that we just talked about, the need for them would go away if Kane Avenue was extended to this point, cul-de-sac is installed, and that's all paved. Lot 3 then clearly has the frontage it needs, and the discussion at that point in time in the past was that there might be a path to look at a temporary access remaining onto the county road, subject to both the city and the county approving that, because it's a county road, the county does have to approve that as well. But with clear touch points in time as to what might trigger the driveway to have to be removed from the county road and then redirected to the city street instead. If we were to approve the other variances where this is not constructed, the city standards, it would be difficult to have that temporary driveway removed without forcing the need for Kane Avenue to be improved. And then there would be questions as to who would pay for that improvement, how that would be accomplished, etc. I think with that overview of the proposed project and the variances, I'd like to turn it over to the developer's representative, and they can go to the podium and provide any information that they would like to have, and then we can go ahead and open the.
That sounds great. Would you like to come to the podium? The green light is on. If you could just state your name and your firm, that would be great.
Sure. Thank you very much. Anton Cheskis, CHESKIS. I'm with Hugh Muller, Gantara, and Cheskis in Prior Lake. Here on behalf of John Kane, the owner and the applicant. We had a little misunderstanding about whether or not he could appear by Zoom. So apologize that John's not here, but happy to speak on his behalf. This is a 22-acre property that's got residential homestead, hobby farm, and various outbuildings. The farm has been in the Kane family for over 125 years. John's lived on Kane's Corner for his whole life, 80 years. I'm sure many of you know John Kane. John was the original developer of Century Pond in 1999. So when that development went in, he had no intention of developing this hobby farm, which is why these 22 acres were not subdivided. true to his word, no subdivisions occurred in this area for the last 22 years, and he still doesn't intend to subdivide the hobby farm. The current subdivision plan allows John to sell off 2 lots and transfer lot 3 to his son Jim, who's going to continue the family legacy of having a farm on Kane's Corner. So the plan for lot 3 is to be platted as a hobby farm. It's not an outlot for future development. This is not a phased development. So lot 3 will remain a hobby farm. Certainly in the short term, there's no plans for his son to develop it further. I mean, obviously at some point, there's a possibility that will be developed, but that's not what is before you today. So 7 variances sounds like a lot, but as Ms. Nash explained, they all relate to this single issue of, is the road going to be extended or not? And just to be clear, there appeared to be some confusion in the public comments regarding stormwater. The applicant's not requesting any variances regarding stormwater management. City code does require a stormwater management plan for developments that create over 1 acre of impervious surface or have 4 lots. John's engineer submitted some plans that show that this creates 0.75 acres of impervious surface, which is why there's no stormwater management plan. That said, if the variances are granted with conditions that a plan be provided, we're happy to do that. I want to talk about the variance standard a little bit. The standards changed not that long ago, really, in Minnesota to be much less restrictive. The old undue hardship standard was replaced by the practical difficulty standard. And I'm concerned that city staff is still evaluating this application based on that old restrictive mindset of the old standard. So in order for the applicant to establish practical difficulties, landowners got to show 3 things. 1, that the property owner proposes to use the property in a reasonable manner, not permitted by the official control. 2, that the plight of the landowner is not due to circumstances, is due to circumstances unique to the property not created by the landowner. And 3, that the variance, if granted, will not alter the essential character of the locality. So in this case, John Kane's proposing 2 additional developed lots and to keep a pre-existing non-conforming use of the driveway on Highway 27 on a temporary basis, as long as that lot is not developed. So 2 lots and a hobby farm that already exists is clearly a reasonable use for this property. The real key to this property that makes it unique from other subdivisions is that lot 3 will not be developed as part of the subdivision. It'll retain access to County Road 27, not from local streets within the subdivision because it's not being subdivided. And if you look at city staff's comments to variance 7, they're telling you that, hey, we don't want farm equipment accessing lot 3 through internal city streets. We want the farm equipment coming off of 27. So that's what makes this unique. If the development included a development of lot 3, I think I wouldn't be here today asking for any variances. We'd extend Kane Avenue. But the fact that this, and which the county's already indicated, by the way, that as long as it's a temporary basis, then the county's fine with that driveway remaining.
Could I stop you there though? Because
Sure.
you said it's not going to be temporary. It's just that there's no plans ever to subdivide lot 3 into other.
It's
So
temporary.
it's not, that's not temporary then. It's
It's te-
permanent, isn't it?
It's temporary to the extent that until lot 3 is developed. So again, at some point,
But
it's
right.
conceivable that lot 3 will be developed. And at that point, the driveway will be removed. But while it's a hobby farm, again, not only is city staff telling you that we don't want farm equipment access, to access the lot through local streets, the county's telling you, yeah, if it remains a pre-existing non-conforming use, that's fine for now. So we think that satisfies the second prong. And as to the third prong, this will remain a hobby farm, whether or not Kane Avenue is extended further or not. So it's not going to, the variance does not alter the essential character of the locality. I would highly encourage you all to read that practical difficulties criteria and apply it to this application. And it's in the city ordinance 2-2-2. And that mirrors the Minnesota statute, which is 462-357 subdivision 2-6 sub 2. In this case, we think that denial of the application will force John to terminate a farming operation that's been here for 125 years. It sends a bad message to hobby farmers and farmers in general in the city. And I did talk to John this morning. He has looked at comments, looked at what the city sent in. He had a possible compromise where he could extend Kane Avenue in that disputed area as a low maintenance road, graded and seeded with grass, which would then remain in that way until Lot 3 is developed, if ever, to at least indicate that, hey, this is where everything is going. But the dedication is 66 feet. So I really don't understand the allegation that perhaps in the future it's going to cost more for the abutting landowners. So in summary, we believe the variance applications establish practical difficulties. Preliminary plat is complete, and we ask that the applications be approved. And again, happy to answer any questions.
It's my understanding that these variances would go away if there was a plat, a draft plat that had Kane Avenue extended with the cul-de-sac. This next picture right here. All the variances go away with this. Is there, besides it costing money to extend it out a little further, are there any other reasons why you wouldn't just take that approach and get approval, get all the approvals
Sure.
and there's no issues at all?
Sure, no, that's a legitimate question because I think you're right that the variances would go away. Number one, Lot 3 has access to County Road 27, right? It makes it unique to other developments in the city. The standard again isn't, hey, can you do it a different way, right? The standard isn't, well, there's a way to comply, which means you have to comply. The standard is you're proposing a use that that fits in with the locale, that there's a practical difficulty, there's a unique circumstance to your property that you didn't create. And by the way, John Kane did not create this problem because the driveway was there before the zoning ordinance got there, right? And before Scott County zoning ordinance got there. So it the problem predates, or excuse me, he predates the problem.
But because the driveway is temporary, to me, temporary means it's going to be temporary, and those lot 3 will be subdivided someday. And it's the developers, it's my understanding, developers' responsibility to extend the road out for those future lots to be served. And in your proposal, you're not doing that.
Right, and in this case, it's, define temporary, right? But the point is this developer is not developing Lot 3, right? So to the extent that a bridge to nowhere sits there for 20 years, perhaps more, doesn't seem to make a lot of sense for this developer, especially on a small development scale like this, especially when it's going to continue to be a hobby farm in the family. And of course, there's an economic element involved. It's not the only element, but it is an economic element where, I think you've got before you a bid for $125,000 to extend the road. I don't think that bid included the full costs of grading to city standards. It's probably closer to 200.
Couldn't you get that 125,000 back when you eventually sell the other lots?
But he's not selling lots. He's transferring the lots
But then it's
to
not temporary. That's the thing. That's not temporary. He's going to sell the lots.
he's transferring lot 3 to his son.
Mhm.
It's an inheritance, it's an estate plan.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I'd like to direct, he has made some comments that maybe there's some misapplication of the law. As
Sure.
you see it, could you speak to that?
For the city attorney would be.
There's the factors in general. The attorney has given in generality what the standards are, but there are other parts here about not creating, that are addressed in the planning report itself, about it can't be just an economic consideration. And I think that is needle that the attorney is trying to balance on. He's saying, well, yes, there is economic considerations, but there are other things here that I want you to consider. And their position is that something that is unique here, and that's one of the factors that you have to have. It's got to be, can't be an economic consideration under the statute. It can't be that under your ordinance. It can't be that under the statute. It's got to be something unique to this property. Traditionally, people look at that as something physical aspect of the property, a giant hill or something, a cliff that somehow would block that road being extended or something like that. What the applicant's attorney is recommending to you is that you also consider the fact that this lot 3 has a pre-existing access to one of the county roads. And although he's saying that'll be temporary, I think the issue that the applicant's attorney has with the city staff is because the city staff is also pointing out to you that is an economic consideration. This is something that in the city staff's view is created by this applicant. It's their desire not to pay the money to extend the road as shown on this graphic that's before you right now. So again, yes, these are some of the factors, but there are more that you could put more time on, including that economic consideration, which is laid out. In state law, it cannot be an economic consideration. That's something unique to the property.
Can't be only economic.
And I would guess we're just doing. So at this point, that's what I think the issue is. And it comes down to that. You know, the argument of the applicant is that the unique characteristic of this property is it just happens to have, before it was subdivided, it happened to have an access onto the county road, and they want to keep that. Now, I haven't seen anything at the present time that says the county has said that you could keep that. And like we said, that's a county road. And generally, the county wants the accesses to the county road to be eliminated and used in internal streets. But I haven't seen that, and I don't know if you have anything.
Yeah, there's a letter, I thought it was in your packet, dated June 21 from the county, where county indicates, and I'll quote it, that it says, since this concept is only 2 lots and a larger parcel remains, the county is open to having the existing driveway to County Highway 27 remain on a temporary basis, provided there's a mechanism for the driveway removal at a future date, such as future subdivision of the larger lot 3.
But that was
Yeah.
based on that plan,
Yeah, sorry.
not your, sorry. go ahead.
Yeah, that letter was not included in their packet because it's
Oh.
old and related to the concept plan before that's more similar to this than the current proposal.
But just to be clear, the lots themselves are the same that led to the county's comments on this. I
They're
mean,
not, because lot 3 no longer fronts on an improved city road. So in all of my discussions with the county, it had been, if there's a way that at such point in time, any one of whatever triggers would be determined, and again, this was all very conceptual. So the triggers hadn't been even discussed yet, but you know, they're typical things like, if they did county road improvements, that might be a trigger. If lot 3 was further subdivided, that might be an automatic trigger, and there would probably be other automatic triggers built into that. But then the driveway could be redone, basically realigned and connected to an improved Kane Avenue, and they'd have another way out.
and I'm not disputing that we'd need county approval. I mean, I know that even if we get approval here today, we got to go to the county. And if they say, yeah, this is a cute letter, but we're not going to do it, you know, then we're done.
So Cindy, wouldn't we have to put these things on hold then and submit this new plan to, not that one, the other one, to the county and have them see if they would approve it with all these variances?
No, because ultimately, I mean, it can go both ways. Somebody has to make a decision first, so.
Okay.
And in this case, with that particular part of the variance, both entities would have to agree.
So, Mr. Chair, just one question directed to you. The concept plan that was submitted, so on the larger acreage lot, the way it's subdivided with separate lots showing even down to proposed maybe septic systems, was that all submitted by your client or you?
So the city staff required a ghost plat of how lot 3 could potentially be subdivided in the future. That's why that's on there, but that's the only reason it's on there.
Just coming from a farming background and development background. We can all say it's never gonna get developed until the next developer comes in, and starts waving millions of dollars at you.
Sure.
And find out, I got it, it makes sense to do this.
And at that point, that's why we gave the right of way, right? Because at that point, that developer can extend Kane Avenue and plat it and
I saw something too, Cindy, in the notes in the paperwork. So anytime that a parcel like this has been subdivided, all those lots have, or without a variance, they all are supposed to connect to an interior development.
Correct.
So is this unique, or is this how this in Credit River with all the farmland that's been developed over the years? Has there ever been a situation like this where you have a farm that's remaining and they're just selling off?
Yeah, it's pretty frequent that only a part of the farm will develop at a time along the way, and it's certainly not unique that the farm has direct access as it's starting out in the development process onto a county road.
Right.
That's not unique to,
But the
Okay,
interior
farm.
roads are developed according to our ordinances.
right, and whether this was termed lot 3 or outlot A is sort of irrelevant. Because under either scenario, we would have, something that looks more like this, where the cul-de-sac is, it might be a temporary cul-de-sac if it's outlot A instead of, but it's still kind of the same general thing, that there's something stubbed in and provided to this for the future.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Cindy, does lot 1 and lot 2 then go back to the other one that you had up? Yes, that one. Lot 1 and lot 2 meets all our city requirements at that point, the way it's set up now. Except there's no stormwater work yet.
Yeah, and I'll defer to City Engineer Nelson to discuss the stormwater.
That is correct. And in my review, I believe that a stormwater management plan is required. Our ordinance allows up to 30% impervious coverage for our rural residential lots. Lot 1 is 2.5 acres. That means that lot would be allowed up to 0.75 acres of impervious coverage. Lot 2 is 3.39 acres, which means that lot would be allowed up to 1 acre of impervious coverage. And then there's also the cul-de-sac. So my position is that this development does require a stormwater management plan. It has not been submitted yet. But that is my interpretation. The one other item is this development also somewhat changes existing drainage patterns. So right now, there's kind of a drainage swale that drains through. They're building a cul-de-sac, which would change the drainage patterns. And it's important for us to understand how that affects the local area. And we review to make sure there's no adverse impacts to the adjoining properties.
So if the cul-de-sac is on the west side, does that affect the stormwater as well, or on the east side? This one is a stormwater issue there as much as it is on the second one, or doesn't that make a difference?
In my opinion, either option would require a stormwater management plan.
Now, when I look at developments that are going in, they all either have a cul-de-sac at the end of it for future developments, they're all there, or they've got a road stubbed in and it's ready to go forward for the next phase that's already in plan. So that's what I've seen.
Mr. Chair, Shane, when the variances were granted and it went as proposed, those first 2 lots without a stormwater management plan, would that change the future? If all of a sudden they go to the large lot, that becomes developable, and they can't now go back onto those first 2 lots that are given if those variances are granted. It's too late to bring anything new stormwater wise onto those 2 lots that were granted if those variances were approved, correct? So in other words, that large piece of property says, okay, we're gonna go with it. No stormwater management plan. Those two lots, houses get built on them. Down the road, that bigger acreage gets developed, gets so developed. Now they're looking at those first two lots going, wow, we should have had a stormwater management plan where we could have taken this all into concept for the grading. Is that a realistic scenario or not?
Yeah, I think that is a realistic scenario. I mean, there's often times where a development might account for something that may happen in the future, like future phases. However, it's not required. So the requirement for this project would be to manage the stormwater from the two lots and the cul-de-sac. And just to provide us a simple model. And it's really, we're not talking about a lot of improvements necessarily. Usually, stormwaters are holes in the ground. So, they're not really expensive infrastructure, but they're very important. So, that would be the applicant's choice. They could plan for the future, for future subdivision, or they could just deal, they would only be required to just deal with the new stormwater or the change in the stormwater runoff.
And again, if I could just clarify, I think I mentioned that if there's variances approved with conditions, one of which is a stormwater management plan, I think he's happy to do it. I mean, this was strictly because I think the engineer interpreted actual impervious surface being created versus what's possible, which is why there's a discrepancy. But that's not the elephant in the room, right? That's
So my question for you then is what you're proposing right now versus the last slide that you have where the cul-de-sac abuts right into the larger acreage lot. Really, the only reason that doesn't get done is because of financial in my eyes. We can all say it's never going to be, no one can say that larger parcel is never going to get developed or won't get developed for 25 years. That's a statement someone could make, but it can change like that. But we as a planning commission are saying, what are we going to say based upon the knowledge at hand, which is that could develop a year from now. So it is the only reason that cul-de-sac doesn't butt in, where there's no variances needed, is really financial.
I disagree. I mean, I would say that it doesn't go there because it doesn't need to go there, because there's access to lot 3 off of a county road that's going to remain as part of the subdivision. And again, I'd refer you to the standard, which is the proposed use reasonable? Is the circumstance not created by the landowner? And if the variance is granted, will it not alter the essential character of the locality? That's the standard. So applying that to, not extending this road to a lot that is not being developed by this developer, I think makes sense because of that access. And obviously, if there's no access off 27, then there's no other option. But in this case, there's options, and that would be the reason, is because why would they construct a road that's not necessary for this development?
Okay, do you have anything else to say? Otherwise, we'll ask for, we'll open up the public hearing and get comments from folks in the room that wants to make a general statement. Mr. Cheskis, right?
Got it. Thank you for your time.
We'll ask you to stick around, because you may want to come back up and address any concerns people have. Cindy, did you want to read in the comments we've already received? I believe we received 5 today. 5 over the last few days.
We have received several over the last few days.
Oh, sure. So I'm going to open up the public hearing tonight. So is there anything else I need to say other than I'm opening it? Okay.
So excuse me, I'm not going to read, because it will be here for quite a while. So I'm not going to read these in their entirety into the record. But copies of these comment letters have been provided to all of the planning commission members, along with the applicant, Mr. Cheskis. And the comments that we've received were from Matt and Martha Bjork, a comment letter dated November 18th, 2021, generally discussing their concerns with a number of issues about the property in a 4-page letter. The second one is an email that was received today, November 18th, from Travis Dockenbach. And again, expressing concerns about the proposed development. And the variance is supposed to be applied for. The third email is from David Elliott. An email dated November 18th, 2021, that outlines 5 different concerns related to the expansion. And I think several of these people, by the way, are here today and they might explain comments themselves. The fourth one is from Tracy Herman, who is the Century Pond HOA treasurer, again expressing a number of concerns related to this proposed development. And the fifth one is from Benjamin Lemke, dated November 17th, again expressing several concerns related to the development. Just summarizing what all these letters talk about, it tends to revolve around stormwater concerns.
Right.
Placement and angling of some of how some of the houses might be located on the site, and the number of variances and the purpose for them.
Thank you. Is there anyone tonight that the five letters we did receive, is there anyone tonight that want to address the public or address the commission? Why don't you come up, state your name and address?
Sure. My name is Martha Bjork and I live at 21871 Century Court. So I wrote the letter, the 4-page novel in front of you. I apologize. But so I wrote that one. I do have several concerns. I outlined them in the letter with my husband, and a couple of them have to do with the road construction. Would you mind going to the previous one? So in the previous one, the fact that Mr. Kane is not completing the road all the way out is a major concern to us, because it means that we will end up paying for it later on as city taxpayers. You know, they already talked about different ways to put the cul-de-sac out here, which would alleviate these concerns, and then we wouldn't have to pay for them. And I would argue to Mr. Kane's lawyer's point that this is not unique, because Mr. Kane had this issue when he first developed this property 20 years ago. And he did the right thing at that point, going all the way through past the driveways and connecting a stubbed road to the property. So he did the right thing at that point, and did not connect his road. So yes, he still had the driveway onto County Road 27, but he also provided that access to the lot in the case of future development. I would also say to Mr. Kane's lawyer's point about Mr. Kane being true to his word that he wasn't going to develop the rest of this property 20 years ago when he developed Century Ponds. Obviously, that's not true, because we're here. So his saying that lot 3 will not be developed further, I don't really believe, right? It's really hard to believe when we're here right now talking about the subdivision of the property. The other thing that I noticed in the narratives for the variances is that Mr. Kane talked about the fact that the lot 3 was not being subdivided, and that's why he shouldn't be held to some of these ordinances, which is not true. It is being subdivided. Yes, it is the main farmland, but it is being subdivided and should still be held to the ordinances. The last thing, the stormwater, I understand that Mr. Kane's lawyer said that he would submit that plan. He hasn't yet. He's been asked multiple times, as was shown in the staff report by the city planner. So it doesn't make me feel very good that that's going to happen. And I don't think the preliminary plat should be approved before that's in place. I will say that because I live in this property right here. And this pond right here is the main mechanism for what he says is going to be drainage from this development. And that pond is already pretty well at capacity. In the spring, our property all in here floods so badly that we can't mow in that part. I know that our neighbors right in this area, they have a portion that they cannot mow as well because it is so soggy and it would tear up their lawn. Our neighbors over here, they have a portion that they don't mow ever, not even just in the spring, but ever, because of the current drainage problems. So I think it would be very premature to approve a preliminary plat when he has not addressed these concerns. And so far, he hasn't done that. So again, I respectfully ask that you deny these requests, that you deny these variances. The city of Credit River has ordinances, they've got good ordinances. We have them for a reason. I ask that you follow that and you hold him accountable to that like he did the first time when he developed Century Farms.
Okay, thank you very much,
Thank
Martha.
you.
Appreciate it. Is there anyone else who would like to make a comment tonight?
I don't know how you follow up with that. I guess I'll take a shot here. Oh, yeah.
State your name and address for us, please.
Yeah, my name is Ben Lemke. I'm at 21901 Century Court, right next to Martha. Right here, where she mentioned, also have significant concerns with the existing stormwater drainage. So any additions here, I think, will only exponentially make that worse. I'd also like to address the nature of the road. So it said something about changing the characteristics of the neighborhood. I think a gravel road certainly is not, something that wouldn't change the characteristic of our neighborhood. I also would address it was something along the lines of a grass covered cliff. It's kind of what I'm imagining as a potential, talk about a safety concern. That's definitely not something that we'd be interested in having little kids in the neighborhood. But other than that, I think Martha pretty much covered it and the rest of the comments are in writing.
Okay, thanks, Ben. Appreciate it. Anybody else? Is there anyone online tonight that would like to make any comments?
They can't.
Oh, they can't. Oh. is there a
It's just
problem today?
video.
Oh, it's just video. Okay,
Yeah. we haven't done that.
sorry.
That was only during COVID.
That's COVID. Yeah, sorry. Okay. Hearing no other comments from the public, I'm going to close the public.
Well, wait, I would,
Ask-
may wish to ask the attorney for the applicant if he'd like to address any of the comments before you close.
Sure, briefly. Just on the issue of the stormwater management, again, just to beat a dead horse, but this was a disagreement with the engineer and city's engineer. But I mean, hearing the current stormwater concerns, I think if the variances are granted, I think again, then it's, okay, well, let's talk about conditions. And I think a reasonable condition would be do a stormwater management plan. So I think the city code would allow for the variances in the preliminary plan to be approved with the condition that you do a stormwater management plan. That will be approved by the time the plan applications.
And that was one of the requirements to get the preliminary plat approved back in June, correct? Or no?
That's been a long running comment on the comment letters that myself and the city engineer have submitted
Okay.
to the developer. It just hasn't been addressed yet. But largely because of the disagreement.
Yeah, and
But-
I believe the engineer did communicate his position to the staff. I think during our last Zoom call, I asked for Michelle to provide me with this computation of impervious surface for this development, which I never saw, but listening to today, it sounds like it's just, hey, what impervious is available here? And then that's the calculation of the city.
One more question before you go. There was a discrepancy between a $250,000 cost and $125,000 cost. What is the number?
My understanding is it's closer to 250, the 125, and I don't have specifics, but I believe that includes all of what will be necessary to complete the road to.
So we should disregard the letter from the Art Johnson Trucking Company. I think it was Barbara Kane or Barbara Johnson Kane.
I mean, you can look at it as it'll be at least 125. Again, economic considerations alone don't get you a variance, but
And then I have one last question. Was there a reason why the stub portion of that road was only 33 feet wide in one part on half of it and 60 on the other half? Is it just, why is it proposed to be that way?
I think I can answer this. So going back a couple different versions of the plat, they were proposing, rather than platting the road as right away, to just dedicate an easement for a future road across lots 1 and 2. And I think that what they did when they turned in this version was likely to just change that easement line to a right of way line instead and left it where it was.
Okay,
Yeah, yeah. 66.
okay, thank you very much. Can I get a motion to close the public hearing?
Mr. Chair, I'll make that motion.
Steve,
I'll
can I get a second? Amy, seconds. All in favor of closing the public hearing, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the public hearing portion of our discussion is closed. Does anyone have any other questions for Cindy or for Shane?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, the existing road right now doesn't have a cul-de-sac on the end of it. What's the history on that?
I cannot, I think the development was originally constructed in 1999, so it was prior to the city having, or, you know, the former township having its current road standards. And it also, of course, predates our zoning ordinance.
And sometimes, I can't, I'm just telling you what happens, sometimes I can't say that this is what occurred in this case, I know so long ago. When it's a shorter stub to a property and doesn't exceed a certain length, not all communities do require the cul-de-sac at the end. Or the turnaround until it hits a certain point. So that may have come into play there, but certainly when you start getting as long as this is, we do need the turnaround to meet fire code.
Cindy, one more question. Their proposal, cul-de-sac being on the western property line before they get to the first two lots. And there's a road easement, is that correct, for future, or what exactly is that?
They have it shown on the plat right now. Well, it's a little confusing, actually. So on the plat document, it's shown as dedicated right of way. That would then become city right of way. On the grading plans, it's still showing as this easement. So it's probably a little confusing when you look between the two sets of plans. But right now, with this preliminary plat, it would be dedicated right of way. That would be something that, you know, with the estimated cost of whatever it is, $125,000 to $250,000 to construct this segment of road. That would be something that somebody else in the future would have to construct instead of Mr. Kane if these variances are granted.
That would be that cut. So basically from the cul-de-sac as it's shown right there, from there all the way proceeding west until the large acreage lot, that road would happen at the next, when that development happened, the next future development happened, that road would go in. And that next developer would have to go in there and cut that road in at that time, get rid of the cul-de-sac as it's fronting those two lots as what's proposed. So all that would get torn back out again.
That would all get torn back out. The developer would have to try to grade in the road within the confines of that 66-foot right away. And then in addition to paying for the extension that they would normally pay as part of their extension, which is this part that's in a light gray, they would also be paying the $125,000 to $250,000 that apparently this section would cost. They might then be coming in as well for their own variance, saying that they didn't cause this situation.
Correct.
Shane, is that the normal ballpark, 125 to 250 to build it according to code? From what you proposed?
Commissioners, I haven't done any estimates on this road. I would say that there's, you know, we've been provided maybe a ballpark cost of the road construction. But we haven't been provided the differential. No matter what, there is a cost of construction here. You know, a couple other things to keep in mind when you're evaluating this is in this configuration, lots 1 and lots 2 will have no choice but to construct their driveways off of that temporary cul-de-sac. Which means in the future, if that temporary cul-de-sac is removed, their driveways will have to be impacted. And you know, so that would be putting that responsibility on some future developer as well, to cut their driveways and repave them now to match the new, much narrower street.
Would the property owners be on the hook for that? Or who would be on the hook for that? For taking out that
Generally, when a
cost?
temporary cul-de-sac is removed, it is the developer that is removing the temporary cul-de-sac. However, we try to accommodate our planning such that there's no driveways
Right.
located in that area. So, in addition to driveways, there's usually, sod, sprinkler systems, landscaping. With this dedicated right of way of Payne Avenue, that's one of our questions is who's gonna maintain that? Likely the adjoining property owners would kind of assume some maintenance of that. Probably have, sprinkler systems and landscaping and sod in that area, which again, just makes it much more difficult to extend in the future at some later date.
Does anyone on the commission have any other questions before we?
Yeah, I've got two more.
Sure.
There was mention of HOA. Who takes the cost of maintaining this? Is that HOAs or is that city? Either way we go?
The road,
Yes.
it's a city road. It would be city.
Okay.
Okay.
And the second question I had is if they went to the second method with the cul-de-sac going all the way east, all 7 variances go away, or is the variance for the county road still exist?
The first 6 variances go away. And I think we would still be talking about that variance related to the county road. Because that is where we started from originally back in June.
But back in June, we hadn't voted for it, but we probably could get comfortable with that, correct? If
Yeah, it was
If
more
the plan-
staff talking with the developer and with county staff at
Right.
that point in time, but it was brought up as a concept plan review
Mhm.
by the city council back then. That generally, if something looked kind of like how this plan shows, there was a path potentially to get towards a way to figure out that temporary driveway.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Cindy, is the developer opposed to this setup? The one we have on the screen now, or not?
We believe they're opposed because we've said a couple times that this would work and meet the city's ordinances, so, and they've filed the request for the variances, so.
I'm struggling to approve the variances because I come back to, it seems to me like it's an economic issue and that's what it is. And there's an alternative to it that would work and we would remove all the variances with the exception of the 7th one. However, that one could probably eventually pass because if we get the county to approve that concept plan.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
And Cindy, where are we at with the 60-day timeline? If something like this was to be tabled?
You could table it one time, and then we could bring it back to your December meeting. And then still have enough time to get it to the city council.
With the understanding that we were looking at the original one instead of doing all the variances?
I think before you tonight, you have to consider, and I'll defer to Attorney Groupie, but I think you have to consider the application that they have made instead.
Which is all 7.
Right now before you is 7 variances. That is what ultimately you either have to make a recommendation to approve, make a recommendation to deny, or make a motion that you're not going to submit to the city council any recommendation. It's your prerogative. But these are the ones that are before you right now. You do, I'll defer to Cindy on the 60-day timeline because I haven't tracked that, but it is something, and I'm glad that you guys mentioned it, that you guys are recognizing that is always in the background here.
Yes.
One thing nice about that is staff will always be calculating that and revising it so that we don't run afoul of that. But this is something that you are going to have to consider, and those are your 3 options.
So point of order, it does, if we disapprove all the variances and the preliminary plat, to city council then at that point.
Yes.
With a disapproval.
You,
Or
We're
denial.
recommending that.
you are recommending,
Right.
so that is your recommendation
Right.
to the city council.
So then the city council's back in the same spot that we're at. And,
And they make the ultimate decision.
right,
Mr. Chair, I think there's one thing, just as a planning commission, we have to be really careful for, is that we're not making decisions based upon one property. There will be future developments in front of us, and I struggle to approve any development that comes forward that to make it work, we gotta get 8 variances to work on this one property. And we will have this, maybe not this property, but other properties in front of us. And what we deny or approve will come back in some ways to future discussions on other developments.
Right.
Mr. Chair, that was my question. I wanted to ask staff was, talk to us about how this could or could not set precedent.
It legally will not set precedent because every variance will be looked at on its own merits by this body and by the city council. However, that being said, you'll always have everyone pointing to you how you handled one situation and saying that we should be treated equally. And there could be how this, not so much you as the city council, how they interpret their ordinances may be impactful to a judge. Courts do look at that. It's not only what does your ordinance say, it's how have you interpret it by staff and by the planning commission and the city council.
So, Cindy, a question probably toward you. Just so we all understand what the ramifications are of our moves, even though we are advisory board to the city. Basically, if we chose to deny this tonight, just flat out deny it. At that point in time, I would expect Mr. Kane and his attorney to be having conversations with you guys, even before it may go to city council saying, all right, this doesn't sound like it's gonna work. So how can we, what are some alternatives? Would that be happening behind the scenes, or would that, or if we deny it, do they just wait and hope their luck with the city council is different?
Anything can happen.
Okay.
I've certainly had both situations where sometimes it just goes forward to the city council and then makes a final decision one way or the other on the applications. Certainly other times I've had developers withdraw their application and go back a little bit to the drawing board. Sometimes they just turn in a new plan,
Sure.
but it will be up to them as to what path they want to take. Recognizing that if a variance is denied, you can't apply for the same variance for a certain period of time. And because I have the screen open, I can't open up the ordinance and find what that is at the moment. But that could make it difficult if the city council were to make a decision to deny on all of those variants. It could put it in a difficult position to come back with a new plan after a denial related to that one variance.
I'm comfortable recommending that to the city council that we deny these variances as well as the preliminary plat, since the variances would be denied. Just due to the fact that I think it's economic and there's an alternative that has already been presented to the developer. And so it's not like we're saying no to the whole thing. It's just that it has to follow our ordinances, and we don't want to have everyone in the future to go back and look at this, and we'll have 10 variances every time someone wants to develop a platform. That would be my recommendation to the planning commission.
So is that supposed to be put in a motion?
Yes, I would ask for a motion that we would deny all 7 variances at this time. I'm still confused on the 7th variance. That could be eventually approved in the future if the county agrees with it. I don't know how that
So
works.
great distinction here is that they're applying for this as a package, basically, with this plat. So
Okay. So we'll
with
deny all
this
7.
plat,
Sure. So we would deny all 7. I'm recommending that we deny all 7 variances as well as the preliminary plat tonight.
So just before we move on to that motion, another question, because just because we are on the board, but I just want to make sure from what I heard, there's 3 choices. And I just want to make sure that if someone could explain the ramifications of all 3 choices, so we know exactly what we're doing.
Well, I think the choices are pretty self-explanatory. You recommend approval.
Yeah.
Approval is what the applicant is asking
Sure.
for, as stated in their application. Number 2 would be denial. That's denying what the applicant. Number 3 would be, and I've seen this before. I don't go to planning commission members, but I have seen or heard where people can't agree. And so they just vote, we're not going to give you a recommendation. So that, and you could, and then you can make recommendations to the city council about, well, we want to approve this, but we recommend certain conditions, sort of what the attorney for the applicant was referring to. Oh, well, if your sticking point was, oh, stormwater, well, we'll approve it, but we want this condition or that condition.
Right.
All of this.
And a variation of that version is, and rather than having some of those items be conditions of approval, sometimes what will occur is that the developer will voluntarily say, I'll go back and I'll address these, whatever number of things, and we'll bring the plat back to you next month with those items cleaned up.
Versus it seems to be that we're all kind of on the same wavelength, that road and cul-de-sac should get taken out to that next boundary.
Right.
And so with that, it'd be just a flat out denial, so that they would go back and either have to start the process over again. Is that correct?
Again, that will make it a little tricky related to that one variance for the temporary access to the county road, because they might have to wait. They'd have to wait out that clock on that time period. Can't recall if it's 6 months or a year, but it's not super long, but it's not convenient either, or like the time to wait. So they would have to make a decision on how they want to move forward, depending on what decision they're actually taking.
And remember, your decision tonight is not the final decision. You're just a recommending body. That would be when the city council takes action. They would have to consider that. And by that time, the applicant would know what your recommendation to the city council is. And they could, in a sense, take the temperature about what their chances are before the city council.
Sure.
And address some of the concerns from the public tonight too. I think if we deny the variances tonight and deny the preliminary plat, the concept plan had a drainage or a study that had to be done with the stormwater and all that, correct? Concept, I mean, that was one of the requirements that was proposed back in June, I believe.
It has been our position that a stormwater management plan is required.
Right, and do we need to know from a legal perspective, there's a difference of opinion between the developer's attorney and Shane in terms of like I forget what the language that you guys talk about.
Yeah, it's impervious coverage, and really, I think what the developer's engineer is saying is, well, if they build this size of a house and their driveway is only so narrow, and they're making some assumptions stating that might only lead to 0.75 acres of impervious or whatever that is. But from our perspective, we have to look at, well, what could they do? I mean,
okay,
we see a lot of large houses in the city of Credit River. So they could have an 8,000 square foot house. They could have a 3-car wide driveway. They could have a sport court. They could have an accessory structure. And all those things are very common and very reasonable or practical to expect from my perspective.
Right.
And so I would like to see that accounted for in the design of this development.
Yeah, I hear the residents' concerns about the stormwater, and I share those without having a plan in front of us to consider, to know that is taken into consideration. I also am concerned that failure to develop the road now to standards simply delays or puts off what could be an economic issue in the future. And as I look at that, I understand that the statement is the owner does not intend to subdivide, but I would echo the other sentiments of some of the fellow commissioners in that that does not give a guarantee. And so I have strong reservations about approving the variances under those and the plat under those circumstances.
Mr. Chair, for the sake of discussion, I'd like to make a motion. I would move to deny variances 1 through 7 in the preliminary plat based on not connecting to an internal road network constructed to city standards. Disappointed in no stormwater management. I understand there's some questions about that. But I don't believe the developer appears not to want to incur the expense of constructing Kane Avenue the way it should be. So that's my motion.
Great, and I would just add to that, the other reasons that have been addressed tonight by Cindy in her report is some of the other reasons why the variants are somewhat concerning. So I have a motion to deny the 7 variances and the preliminary plat. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Steve will second. All in favor of denying these variances and preliminary plat? Can I get a vote? Say all. How do you do this? All in favor to deny
In
denial?
favor of the motion to recommend denial to the city council of the 7 variances and preliminary plat requested by the applicant for, what is it, Century Pond Second Edition.
What did I just say?
Do I have to say that?
I get that a lot.
Do I have to say
We'll get
that?
it.
Say aye.
Okay, all right. All in favor of what Bob just said, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes. That's all for that. The next thing on the agenda. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. The second item on the agenda tonight is another public hearing. It's related to our fee ordinance. And I'm going to open up the public hearing. If Cindy, our city planner, could just do a little synopsis of what she's proposing tonight, that would be great.
Thank you. So every year, every city goes through, typically late in the year like this, they'll review their fee ordinance and consider potential changes to that based on a whole number of different reasons. Several of these fees that are being proposed at this time are related to planning, land use, building inspection. So we're having the public hearing before you to consider those proposed fee changes. The first one, so in the ordinance that's in your packet, there's an appendix A to the ordinance that consists of the fee schedule. For the purpose of this, I've mocked that up so that anything that's highlighted in yellow is a proposed change at this point. The first, and anything else that's in there is no change. The first one would be related to below ground swimming pools that are coming in for a building permit. We currently have a fee of $325 plus the state surcharge. And based on the request of Metro West Inspections, who serves as the city's building inspector, they're asking that we change that to being based on valuation of the pool rather than just a flat fee, plus the plan review and the state surcharge. That would bring that fee schedule or that calculation in line with similar types of building permit requests, from retaining walls to anything else that has a that is a little bit more involved. And that is the thing with the swimming pools. They are quite a bit, those below ground swimming pools, especially in Credit River, are really an involved, it's multiple inspections, it's a lot of plan review, and there's just, volume wise, there is a lot of them that occur. So they've made that request to the city that we propose changing that to evaluation.
Who did you say made that request?
Metro West, they're the city's contract building inspector.
Okay.
And city that, whatever that cost may be, if it's $100,000 pool, that total cost goes to Metro West.
No, it doesn't.
Okay.
Metro West based on the city's contract with them, gets a percentage of the building permit, the plan review, the inspection and the plan review revenue. And then the remainder of that cost is meant to accommodate or account for my time, Shane's time, Karen's time, and everybody else who is also having to handle that file.
So it's pretty common, it's market that a lot of cities have this type of pricing arrangement for things like this instead of a flat fee.
Yeah, it's a great question. So we actually, if you look at this, we have a number of flat fees on here. And even though, especially a roof in Credit River might be a $60,000, $75,000 expense, a re-roof, we're just charging $105. But no matter the size of the roof, the inspection process is kind of the same for them. And Credit River kind of made the determination last year when they were setting their fee schedule, but other cities do the same, that it's preferable to have people pulling those permits and getting those inspections done as opposed to weekend warriors out there doing jobs. So we have a number of things from re-roofs, re-sides, install a new water heater that are all just a flat fee. And swimming pools was the anomaly because it was a flat. So all those other ones are flat fees, but there's something that Karen just issues basically over the counter. Our building inspector doesn't review anything with the plans, they're just doing the inspections later. Swimming pools was the anomaly because that's the one item that still requires myself, Shane, and everybody else to review and touch that file and then send it to Metro West for plan review. And then they still have to come up for multiple inspections. So it wasn't really aligning with.
Okay.
I think if
With
when
that.
if we're re-roof, re-siding, re-windows, it's, the original structure is there. The inspections were taken care of, the building permit was pulled at the time of construction versus a re-roof. You're going out there, tearing out, putting on an existing structure. Swimming pools, let's just say, and now we're talking swimming pools, it's basically a new structure. We're gonna dig ground up, just like we're doing a house. So I could see why the change is necessary.
Okay, the next, all right, you want to go through all of these, right?
Yep, the next one that we're proposing is an application fee for a final plat. And I apologize for that. Last year when we put this together, I somehow managed not to include one, so we're asking to add one at this time. The city has been collecting the escrows regardless, but it's just that application fee itself, which again helps to accommodate time for Karen, and Dominique is there
Okay.
working on these applications too. The next one is a specific fee related to a change of address and an address marker. We actually have the address marker fee in the building permit section, and that's 95% of when that fee is charged is with a brand new home that's coming in, and the city's charged $110 from Scott County for that
Sign.
blue sign, and we're passing that cost through. But now we're asking for, we have had some people request a change of address, and that does require some of my time, some of Karen's time, plus that $110 for that address marker. So we're proposing to add that as a separate line item, so it's clear that that can be charged in other circumstances
Okay.
too, along with some reimbursement costs. And similarly to the final plat, we did have a separate grading permit in there, and there typically a lot of the grading permits that we see are really associated with the plat type of action, but occasionally we may have some people who want to do that as a standalone prior to proposing their other development work.
And the last one, driveway access.
Yep, so again, that's another one that I'm just proposing to pull through from that building inspection section down to right-of-way permits as well. Because again, most driveways go in at the time that the building's going in, but we do have some people who want to move their driveway, change it to a different location. And this is more just for clarity to make it clear that it doesn't have to be associated with the building permit. It can just be somebody applying separately. No change in the fee amount or the deposit, just.
So if it was part of a building permit, then it wouldn't be an extra fee?
No, it is an extra fee when it's part of the building permit too.
Okay. It's already itemized out?
It is.
I think all of these proposals are reasonable. The only question I have, Cindy, is, so we look at this once a year.
Mhm.
Do we ever like increase the rates for inflation? Because we're not changing any of the other fees.
Yep.
And
Can
things
be
are
done
getting
in
more-
typically, most communities do it once a year. There's nothing in state law that says you can't revisit it at
At a
any point
different
in time.
time.
But generally, most communities do a kind of a housekeeping deal where they look at it and say, are we still in line here? But if something does need to be modified at any point in time, like any ordinance, it can be modified.
Okay,
Mr. Chair,
yes.
do these fees adequately cover the cost? As outlined?
So because most of your planning fees require that the developer submit an escrow, and they have to sign an escrow agreement saying that they're paying for whatever the actual out-of-pocket costs are, and the city's treasurer monitors that and invoices them monthly, just every 6 weeks or so. It does cover all of that. You know, there could theoretically be some small amount that's not being captured with inflation, but it's really related to that application fee piece and the time of Karen and Dominique. But I think all of our time, any inflation related gets captured.
Okay, good. Any other questions? Okay, can I get a motion to?
Can I ask you to open up the public hearing?
Oh, yes, thank you. So I'm going to open up the public hearing for general comments. Does any citizen here tonight want to make any statement on the proposed changes to the fee ordinance? Hearing none, I think we can close the public comment portion of public hearing for tonight for the fee ordinance. Now,
Could you just make a motion to that?
can I make a motion? Can I get a motion to close the public hearing for fee ordinance?
So moved.
Thank you, Amy. I have a motion. Can I get a second motion?
Absolutely. Could have a second.
Thank you, Steve. Steve seconded. Can I, all in favor of closing the public hearing tonight related to the fee ordinance? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And opposed? None. So motion is carried. Great, thank you.
Mr. Chair, one more thing,
Yes.
just a typo on that driveway.
Yeah,
just
I
saying
saw
that.
that. As I've been staring at it up there.
So we'll, and what we were, so now I can ask for can I get a motion to recommend approval to the city council with the changes that we just discussed on the fee ordinance?
So moved.
Thank you, Amy. I have a motion. Can I get a second? Second. Thank you, Abe. And all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. The last thing on the agenda tonight is general business. We're going to be discussing a proposed amendment to the home occupations. And since you're very busy, would you please explain what changes you're proposing to make tonight?
Sure, so in your packet is just a draft version. We're just looking for feedback from you tonight. No motions to recommend approval. We are holding a public hearing on this. We have had, well, there is a section in this ordinance. You have two types of home occupations, first off. You have some that are really simple. You're operating out of your house. Most people have no idea that you're there. We're gonna put it in a nutshell, and those are just permitted, as long as they can comply with all the ordinance requirements. Then you have this more intrusive type of home occupation that's a home extended business. They might have equipment. They're probably operating out of an accessory building. And you might notice that they're going on and that's occurring there more.
Mhm.
But within that, we have sort of a sub-segment with these exceptions. And there are exceptions related to property owners who park or store one vehicle used for any business use and one trailer with associated equipment parked on the trailer, either indoors or outdoors, provided it's not used for transporting hazardous, flammable, or biological materials. And it also states that the property owner can be the only employee of the business. So that would allow somebody who happens to have their own business to park one vehicle. And that would be on lots less than 10 acres in size today. But then property owners, that would be on lots more than 10 acres in size. The second part of that is the correlation for property owners less than 10 acres in size, and they have a tonnage requirement of what that vehicle can be. We get a lot of questions about home occupations, as you can probably imagine. And one recently came up where it's somebody who could meet the part in paragraph 1 pretty easily, but doesn't have 10 acres, they're on over 5 acres. So the question is a few things. One, does it make sense to potentially reduce that to 5 acres? So that somebody can have just that one vehicle on their property that maybe they're bringing home for convenience or whatever. And I've added some other proposed language to that to try to make it less intrusive to the neighborhood. If we did that, so the vehicle and trailer would not be permitted to be loaded. But then also to provide some flexibility to the homeowner that it might be owned by a business located on a different property if the vehicle is brought home for the convenience of the employee or the business. So it's more of a question of, do you want to relax that standard down to somebody being allowed to have a larger vehicle on down to 5 acres?
I'm okay with it. I had a question though about how do you know if something's loaded or not?
Yeah, we're talking flatbed trailers versus enclosed trailers, or?
Honestly, we're not going to know unless somebody's complaining and it's happening flat. So,
Yeah.
and if
We're not talking plumbers trucks and utility people that bring their utility truck home at
The neighbors will let you know if it's loaded or not.
What is the requirement for a conditional use permit for operating a business? You know, I think it would be helpful to have a little bit of background on that as we,
sure.
particularly I am learning more about this and in my role.
Yep, so I've scrolled down to that section of the
Okay.
ordinance, so it's an interim use permit instead of a conditional use permit.
Okay.
The big difference between the two is that the conditional use permit runs with the land, the interim use permit, if you recall from a couple months ago, that's one where we can put conditions on its termination on it. And timeframes for how long it can exist before they either have to reapply or it expires.
Okay.
So the standards that are applied is that if they're applying for a home extended business, it has to be located on the homestead property of the business owner. They are not permitted to have more than one non-resident employee working on site. The property on which that home extended business is on has to be at least 10 acres. All the buildings that are used in conjunction with it have to meet the state building code. This is a bigger deal than it sounds because a lot of times you'll get old ag buildings that don't meet the code. So theoretically, somebody has to bring that to code. All on-site production, assembly, sales, and service need to be conducted within a building approved for that use. They're not to be bring out in the open. The equipment and vehicles are supposed to be stored in an enclosed structure, and they're not. And then it goes on to state outdoor storage of equipment, supplies, or products is prohibited. They may be required to provide a landscape plan and maintain that landscaping to provide some sort of a buffer.
Mhm.
And that, would be definitely something site specific, depending on what is going on in that piece of property. They need to comply with state noise rules. There's requirements related to solid waste and other appropriate methods of treating and disposing of items. And that kind of goes on for 3 conditions. And if they're in the ag preserve program, they need to comply with those statutes and rules. The access needs to be from a hard surface road unless access via gravel roads approved by the road authority, which is of course the city council.
Mhm.
One business sign is permitted up to a certain size. They have to have their septic system appropriately sized for the use, comply with all other regulations. There's a limit on to 3 of having 3 business associated vehicles. We would establish their on-site working hours in that permit. And then there's some restrictions that vary depending on the size of the parcel in terms of how much accessory structure space they can have.
As long as we're updating this, are we taking off the word township?
Yeah, there's 4 of them in there.
Yeah, we'll already be doing that.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was already approved previously by the council. I just haven't had a chance to circle around and
Yeah.
make all those corrections.
So what made you look at this and want to change it? Was there some citizen that came?
There was a citizen that that has a circumstance, and maybe Leroy can chat about that situation a little bit.
We have several in the northern part of the township that. Quarter of.
Yeah.
Oh. Put that in the meeting minutes. I don't have any coins, sorry.
In the city that have accessory buildings on their acreage, mostly fives. And they have dump trucks and bobcat and a trailer, different things. And over all the years I've been on the council, board council, we've encouraged mom and pop businesses in the township. So
And this isn't likely to
in the
upset
city,
anybody.
incredible.
And this isn't likely to upset anyone.
No, they bring them home now, they just, one individual sold his business, family business, and he kept the dump truck and bobcat. Keeps it at another place, but he said in the winter, he'd like to, if it's gonna be hauling, he'd like to bring the dump truck home so he can leave one warm vehicle, not warm two up. So, okay, that was kind of where it came from.
Do we have a sense for how many such businesses exist and what is currently happening?
Well, again, these might not be associated with the business
Okay,
that's on the premises, because it could just be.
got it.
Somebody's vehicle that they use for work and bring it home at night.
Sure.
And that's what I thought we were talking about, actually. I thought that's what.
At one time, the county kept track of it, and over the years, they haven't kept track of it.
Okay.
We asked for a list several times, we haven't gotten it. And now we're just trying to maybe try and get ahead of the curve a little bit.
Cindy, a question for you on that first page with number 8, the business signs and size.
Yeah.
Is there anything to do with like how high? Is there like they can put them 12 feet in the air? They can put them 4 feet in the air? Is there anything in there at all? On a pedestal, they can't be lit. We see that. But is there any?
There's not currently any height requirement. We could certainly add one.
Yeah.
That might not be a bad idea.
Yeah, I think that would be wise.
I can see some pedestals going up.
So, signage would take a lot of residential.
It is with a home occupation. They're limited to something, currently they're limited to something no larger than 12 square feet in area per surface. And they can't have more than 2 surfaces on a sign, so you could have a, 12 square foot one that you can see coming this way or this way.
So 3 by 4,
Yeah.
just slightly larger than a real estate sign probably.
Is that something you would bring back
Yes,
later as a
Yep.
recommendation?
yep. Again, we can't take any action on this tonight. We would have to have a public hearing, but just looking for preliminary feedback from you and
I'm comfortable with the changes. You don't need any else.
So, Mr. Chair, one question, that 10 to 5 acres,
Yeah.
we're relaxing.
that would be relaxing.
Thank you. Okay.
Are there any concerns about doing that? I mean, it sounds like that's following current practice, or what we're seeing in terms of current practice, but are there any ramifications we should be thinking of as we evaluate that?
You could end up with more of that occurring than you have now, certainly.
Okay.
On the flip side, to the extent that if you do have anybody out there who might be inclined to complain against their neighboring property that has 7.5 acres about the one truck he has, that will save us some enforcement time.
Are there many complaints that come through about it?
About that, no, I haven't seen any. Have you, Karen? Since we've taken over zoning? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, not on the individual truck.
No,
type
no,
of
no,
deal.
no, not on
Lots on how people are operating their home occupation.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
But we do, the size of our outside structures allow them to put up such a building that a dump truck or whatever can be backed into it.
Mhm.
And that's kind of want to talk a little bit about relaxing the 5 acres.
When we, just talking about this 10 to 5 acre accessory buildings, where is the breakdown where you all of a sudden from 5 to 10, your size can grow? I'm just thinking about, if you're thinking of storing buildings or storing equipment outside. And if we relax it down to 5 acres, is the square footage of an accessory building big enough where they could put it inside? Or, at 10 acres, it was, 5 acres, it's not.
Yeah.
At 5 acres, it's 3,600 square feet. And 20-foot height, so they
That's
probably
a
can.
pretty size building.
That's a good size building.
Now, that might not be how they want to use their space or
Sure.
choosing to use it.
Right. Okay. That would be my only concern about relaxing down to 5 acres. So most of the accessory buildings are smaller and they can't expand it to accept any outside vehicles that they'd like to put inside.
Yep. Another thing we could do, if you're so inclined, right, the way I have this drafted, it does not have a requirement to store those exception vehicles inside an accessory building. They could theoretically be parked outdoors as well, specifically says indoors or outdoors. We could, change that. We could allow down to 5 acres, only if they're stored indoors. We can break these up and make some different things if there's any concern.
Well, as Leroy said, we're not looking to put anybody out of business, especially
No.
if they've been here operating underneath this already.
And we did change the height ordinance on this to accommodate so folks can get their motorhomes and such inside before they were lower.
Oh.
So the change of indoor, a lot of them won't be able to put them in that built buildings previously. So, just more information.
Ultimately, we're not the ones getting anybody out of business, they are.
Any other discussion on that? We don't have to make a decision tonight.
No decision needed. The next time that you're having a meeting, advertise this.
Okay.
Okay.
We're bringing it forward. It's not an urgent thing, so I won't be doing it. If there's no other business, I'm not.
Okay, great.
Okay.
There's nothing else left on the agenda tonight. Before we adjourn, I just like to thank Cindy for all the work you did with all the variances and the plat. All that stuff tonight. Thank you, Shane and Bob, for coming. Thank you for fellow commission members for, I think our first meeting was successful in the fact that we got through it.
We're still alive.
Agreed.
Well, let's go look at our vehicles first.
That's a good point. Can I get a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
I heard Amy first. Can I get a second? Mark,
So I'll second, yes.
I have a second. All in favor of adjourning the meeting, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion carried. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful